Today on the show, I had Ryan Campbell. Ryan, at the age of 17, completed a flight around the world in a single engine plane. Afterwards, he found himself flying for a company who's flying World War II planes, and an unfortunate accident happened where he became a paraplegic. But despite this, he was back up in the air very quickly, and now he spends his time here in the States being a speaker. On top of being a speaker, he is just re releasing his book, which is called Born to Fly on Amazon. So be sure to check out the link in the description and also be sure to check out his website. I've watched quite a few of his speeches. Speeches are awesome. And enjoy the show. So you are a world record holder. What
I
is that world record for?
I am, yeah. So I broke two records back in 2013. One for the youngest person to fly a single engine aeroplane or an aeroplane in general, solo around the world. And being 19, I also become the youngest, not only the youngest person, but the first teenager in history to fly solo around the world. So,
Yeah, and how did that dream come to fruition? I mean, such a young age.
oh man, it was for me when I was about 6 years old. I was on an airliner headed to an island in the Pacific Ocean for a holiday, and it was the first time I'd been overseas. I was so young, but it was the first time any of my family, including my mum and dad, had been overseas. So we all headed to this little island, and the flight out there and the flight back was just out of this world to me, and it kind of sparked this lifelong passion for aviation. And then at 14 years old, I found a couple of after school jobs, and I started to learn to fly. So every 2 weeks, I would take a flying lesson, and it was all funded through those after school jobs. And I had this goal early on to fly solo for the very first time on my 15th birthday, which was the legal limit. So the first day that I was legally allowed to fly on my own, I did so. And I think kind of tackling that goal and then achieving it and it being age related started this wild kind of journey of I wanted to do everything at the youngest possible age, whether that be get a private pilot's license or, any commercial pilot's license or, fly around the world. And I was 17 when I first kind of thought about this big adventure, and I started to Google how do you fly solo around the world, and at that point in time, more people had gone to space and had flown solo around the world. So very limited information, but what I found was enough to spark a lot of interest and belief also that I could do it. And it also started 2 years of fundraising and training and planning and building a team. So I think that kind of flight at 6 years old sparked something pretty powerful that is still, a big part of my life today.
Yeah, who was the what was the youngest age before you?
Back in 2008, the record was actually 37, believe it or not. So there really
Wow.
wasn't a record for the youngest person. And then a guy from the States in Florida, he flew around the world at 23 and broke the record. And I saw that when I was 17. It made the news. And at 17, I thought, oh, I have 6 years. This is something I can do. So then I started the process of doing it. By the time the media went out for my flight, it was a very well documented, 60 Minutes and Today Show a bunch of times and a book and all sorts of stuff. That worldwide media sparked a new wave of young people wanting to do this. So I actually helped a couple of guys go ahead and complete it safely. So I think right now there's probably been 7 or 8 young guys who've flown solo around the world and therefore broken the record to make it younger and younger. But it kind of sits at a point now where if it was to get too much younger, it'd start to become really dangerous. So I think probably that wave of young people flying solo around the world's probably embedded in history, and I don't think we'll see too much more of it really.
Yeah. How long is that trip? I mean, to fly across the world in a single engine plane.
Well, it depends how you do it. For me, being at that point in time based in Australia, I'm now based in Nashville, but when I was based in Australia, we obviously had to fly start and finish from Australia. So I started from Sydney and I had to go really all the way across the Pacific Ocean to the US. So by the time I did that, worked my way across the US and then across the North Atlantic, I ended up pretty much at the top of the world in Iceland. So it was a big, long trip. and it was 24,000 nautical miles. It was about 180 hours in the aeroplane, and it was 70 days of flying. So I'd fly one day, and then I'd have the next day to repack the airplane, refuel the big fuel tank inside the cockpit, and really kind of get everything ready to do the next leg. So yeah, 70 days.
Wow, 70 days. So you said you flew over the Atlantic. Did you have to go over the top of the world?
There's a number of ways that you can tackle it. However, the airplane that I was flying is no different than your standard Cessna, really, that you would learn to fly in. It's a four-seat airplane. It normally runs out of fuel after about 5 or 6 hours flying, and I had to, you know, do the longest leg of all. It was 15.0 hours, so I needed over three times the fuel that that airplane had. I needed
Yeah.
three times the fuel plus I needed reserves. So Hawaii to California was 15 hours. So there are a number of ways to do it from a route perspective, but that all comes down to the airplane you're in and the fuel tank you have on board. So the most common ferry routes to move airplanes kind of around the world is up over the North Atlantic from Canada, flying over the tip of Greenland, then landing in Reykjavik in Iceland and refueling and taking off from there and flying to Scotland. So they're the two legs that get you over the North Atlantic, whereas the Pacific, that was about five legs. It was a massive, massive trip to get across the Pacific. So
Yeah. After that trip, what was the place that you wanted to revisit the most?
Oh, look, I live in America, so, I live here for work now as a speaker, but I've always loved the US, so I kinda knew what to expect. I'd been here plenty of times before the round the world flights, so I kind of felt as close to home as I had on the entire trip was when I went through the US. As for the rest of the world, I visited places that I never thought I would ever visit. I descended down and landed in Aqaba, Jordan, at the tip of the Red Sea, and I spent 9 hours over Saudi Arabia, and I saw lava spewing into the ocean off the edge of Hawaii, and I saw deserts and icebergs and glaciers, and it was just, out of this world. One of the places that really sparked my interest was Iceland, to be honest. I found that just a peculiar place. It was intriguing, I think, and I did spend half a day looking around, which was rare on the trip. It was always about kind of the trip itself, not being a tourist. And Iceland's the one place I thought, you know what, I just want to spend a few hours to do a tour and have a look about. So I'd love to go back there if I could, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So how I mean, after this, you must have had like some sort of popularity. How did you go through that?
I'm just a normal Aussie kid, and I tell everyone if I was any more laid back, I'd be lying down. I'm just like, I'm just a normal kid. My dad was a truck driver, and my mum was a stay at home mum, and we raised $250,000 on a laptop computer to make this happen. So I think the 2 years of planning and fundraising beforehand were where the story really lay. So when I got back, yeah, it was a real, really well documented adventure, and I'd been all over TV and more radio interviews than I could ever imagine, and print and newspapers, and it was just wild. And I was named one of Australia's 50 greatest explorers of all time, and I met Prince Harry and Prince William, and just live this life where even as a speaker on the Australian circuit, you have to kind of sit back and take a breath for a minute because you're seeing your story affect other people in such a positive way. And I think it kind of gives some context as to what you did because sometimes it's easy to say, oh, yeah, I did that. That was cool. What's next? But, it's other people's reactions and all of that that um, kind of open your eyes to the magnitude of the trip. So it was a wild thing to process, but it was an unbelievable high. Opened up a lot of doors and provided not only myself but my family and friends a whole bunch of experiences that we would never ever have had if it wasn't for the round the world flight.
Yeah. And so sometime after this, um, 2015, something happened. What was that?
Well, yeah, my life, and my life went from an unbelievable high to an unbelievable low. And, what I just published a book called Born to Fly, the story of the round the world flight. And I was on the speaking circuit and I was flying airplanes. At the end of the day, flying airplanes was my passion. And that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I turned down a job in the airlines, in my dream airline, that airline I wanted to fly for when I was 6 years old. I turned down that job because at 20 and 21, I didn't want to be an airline pilot. I wanted to fly old World War II airplanes, warbirds. That was my dream. So I needed to go out and get some unique experience in order to be able to do that. So I went and took a job flying vintage airplanes. And I was at work one day on December 28th, 2015, a normal day at work. My job was to fly a biplane up and down the coast of Australia and do some aerobatics and take people in that aeroplane. And it was an old airplane built in the 1930s. It was a tremendous machine. It was beautiful. I took off that day just for another flight. There was no oceans to cross, no records to break. It was just a normal day at work. And as we took off the out of a small grass airstrip, the runway disappeared below us and the engine failed. And it failed at a very, very low level. And within seconds, despite me doing everything I could, we're over the top of the trees, and it was just an absolute nightmare. And we were involved in an unbelievably horrific plane crash to the point where I was the only survivor, and I shouldn't have survived. And they cut me out of the wreckage, put me in a helicopter, flew me to hospital, and I had shattered bones from head to toe, quite literally, 5 breaks in my back, a whole number of issues that they operated on. But I also had a spinal cord injury. So I had a spinal cord injury at L1, and I was diagnosed a complete paraplegic. So I had no movement, no feeling below that point.
Wow, to go, from flying across the world to that must have been like quite a big change for you.
It was, and I think it was because, uh, man, like the very thing that provided me joy in day to day life, my passion, being aviation, was the very thing that put me in a spinal cord injury ward. It's not like I was a budding pilot who, had life kind of, at his feet, just going the right way for him, and then ended up in a, snow skiing accident. It was aviation that got me there, and aviation that put me back in the ward. So I, we could talk for, hours and upon hours, honestly. And I mean, we wouldn't even scratch the surface of what that's like. But for me, life's won and lost above the shoulders, and I was up against an enormous physical challenge, but I was up against a even bigger mental challenge. And if I was to want to win the physical, I had to win the mental. And for me, it wasn't just a journey back to walking; it was a journey back to flying. Walking was merely a stepping stone on the way. And I can tell you now that I walk. I look like I've had a few too many Tennessee whiskies, but I'm walking. And not only am I walking, but I'm flying. So, yeah, man, that journey was a hard one, and it's still hard every day. There's a whole bunch of things internally and externally wrong with me that will be wrong with me for the rest of my life. So, but we count the blessings and find a bunch of gratitude and thankfulness, to be doing what I'm doing. And I really am a lucky guy.
Yeah, what do you think like the biggest mental overcoming was in that journey?
I have spent more hours than you could count processing that question, and not just processing that question and reflecting on kind of the journey that I've been on, but comparing adventure and adversity. We look at the highs in life and we look at the lows in life, and we don't want the lows, we want the highs. And there's not many people who get to experience such a high and such a low like I have, let alone all by the age of 21. I literally turned 22 about 2 weeks after the accident in hospital. So by 21 years old, I'd experienced those two polar opposites. And honestly, that gave me an opportunity to compare the highs and lows and to ask myself where I'd truly learned all my life lessons. I can tell you what, I learned the vast majority of them from the lows. So it's been a wild journey to process the mental challenges. And from that journey, I've created a 3-step checklist to navigating change. That's what I speak about on a day to day basis. I'm a keynote speaker. I moved to the US specifically to do that. And that's my full time job. And, and I come up with this three step checklist for a reason, because as a pilot, when something goes wrong, when a red light comes on or a buzzer sounds, the pilot, despite what Hollywood says, doesn't just start pulling levers and pressing random buttons, hoping for the red light to go away. They use a checklist. It's a systematic approach, a proven method, step by step, that you can apply to the current problem in the hope to find a solution. And that checklist culture has been something that's been embedded into me since the day I started learning to fly. We always use a checklist. We always work through uh, every part of our day to day flying in a checklist kind of way. So I wanted to look at the day to day challenges we have as humans, and that's change and adversity. And I wanted to apply that checklist culture to that. So we come up with a 3 step checklist to navigating change, which is gratitude, confidence, and resilience. They are the 3 steps. To answer your question, the most important to me is, I mean, resilience is an unbelievably close second, but it really is the first step, and that's gratitude. And you have to find thankfulness in the problems you're in, whether it's a global pandemic that we navigate right now, or whether that's falling over and breaking your wrist, or whether that's even being bullied, or losing your job. Any adversity you come up against, there is something to be thankful for, and you have to find that. And for me, it was a moment meeting a quadriplegic named Ben, when I was learning to roll over in the physical rehabilitation gym, that made me realize how lucky I was as a paraplegic, how much opportunity I had to adapt. And honestly, it led to me just being lucky to be a paraplegic, and that change of mindset, that gratitude and thankfulness changed everything from that point on. And I wouldn't be where I am now without that gratitude towards the problem that I was in.
Yeah, it's so easy to really just get stuck in a rut and not understand that even the bad things you could be thankful for.
Yeah, 100%. And honestly, the bad things are where the fuel is. So, you can find, it's easy to find gratitude in the good things because they're good things. It's a skill and a test to find gratitude in the bad things. So, once you start to unlock that, it is a up and up journey to leveraging adversity to fuel success.
Right. So how long after this accident did it take you to get in the cockpit again?
Not long, I can tell you. So, for the first little while, I really didn't want anything to do with aviation. And that was for good reason. But it didn't take long before I started to kind of think and create a plan. And, my meetings with the medical team were, hey, how are my feet going to work? Do you think I can fly again? And everything was compared to aviation. And, I was really thinking about flying again as soon as I could. So, one day before I even left hospital, this was the first time I'd ever been out on my own. I actually checked out of the hospital. I took my crutches and I put them across my lap in my wheelchair. I took my bag and I sat it on my knees, my bag of clothes, and I took a cab to Sydney train station from the hospital. I still had my hospital band on my wrist, and I caught the train an hour north. The train broke down. I ended up out of the train into a bus in the rain, and you couldn't have written this, honestly. I ended up on the bus in the middle of the night. I ended up another hour and a half, 2 hours north to the business that I was flying for when I had my accident. And I ended up checking into a motel, and I stayed for the first time on my own that night, out of the hospital and away from family. And the next day, I had a bunch of guys lift me out of the wheelchair and put me into the back of an aeroplane, and we went flying. So I was not yet out of hospital, and I was not yet on my feet, but we found a way.
Yeah. Is there any, like, what's the next step in your aviation career?
Well, my goal was just to get back flying. How do I fly again? And in the beginning, I was probably so naive to think that, hey, maybe I can just go back to fly for a living. And I soon realized that I didn't have any push in my feet and I wasn't going to get that back. So I can't stand up on my toes like a lot of people. And unfortunately, that means that I can't put the brakes on in basically every aeroplane out there. So there is a small portion of airplanes that have a different style of braking system. They're quite rare. One of those aircraft is called a Piper Cub. And I'd always wanted, since I was young, a yellow Piper Cub, very famous little aeroplane. And this was my opportunity. So the Piper Cub had the right braking system that I could use. So I ended up purchasing one off friends. They really looked after me, and I used that aircraft to get back in the air. So I had to go and do flight tests to get my aviation medical back. I proved to them that I could fly and I could fly safely in that airplane. And they allowed me then to reinstate my medical and go flying. So when I moved to America, I actually pulled that airplane into pieces. We've named it Doug, and we put Doug in a box and shipped it to America. So it arrived in Portland, Oregon. A buddy and I, a buddy who's a mechanic, he put the airplane back together. We test flew it, and then I ended up flying it across America to Nashville. So I now fly regularly in Doug, and we absolutely have a ball doing that. I wanted to fly commercially, and the way that I did that was I actually transitioned across to helicopters. So helicopters don't have brakes for the most part, if they have skids. So I could use the pedals in the helicopter. Even though I didn't know how to fly one, we could test my feet. And once that was a green light, I started and completed my commercial helicopter training. So I now have a commercial helicopter license, and I have my fixed wing license. So, however, flying for now is just for enjoyment as we build a speaking business up. But I hope one day to do a little bit more helicopter work. But we'll see where the wind blows us.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like you could just fly anything.
Yeah, well, and there was a time in my life where I was very lucky to fly a lot of different airplanes, thanks to the round the world flight. A lot of generous people, giving me the keys, saying, "Hey, why don't you fly this and fly that?" And unfortunately, the accident took away my ability to fly a lot of those airplanes. And trust me, I tried, I really did, but my feet just simply don't work, in that way anymore. But very lucky to be able to fly what I can fly now. So very grateful for that.
Yeah. So in becoming a speaker, the message that you're trying to get out, is that the 3-step navigation, or is there something else that you're looking through?
It's unbelievably broad for us. We have an adventure and adversity story. We can talk about adventure alone. We can talk about adversity alone in those different chapters of life. My keynote that I deliver the most is a 3-step checklist to navigating change. And in that, we tell a lot of stories. It's a very round the campfire Aussie storytelling approach. We partner that with a fresh re-release of Born to Fly. We've just re-released it here in the States. So that's super exciting. So that's what I do mostly. We do coaching and all sorts of stuff. It really revolves around mindset. It revolves around change. That's my specialty topic, and obviously adversity and leveraging those bad times to find better times. So
Yeah, yeah. And your book, Born to Fly, when does that re-release?
we just uploaded it to Amazon. So by the time that process gets approved, hopefully this week, we'll see that book live. So it's got all new cover. It's got a little bit of new content in there. It's got a new forward from astronaut and shuttle commander Robert Hoot Gibson. So it's super cool. So hopefully you'll see that on Amazon. If it's not there, just jump onto the website, ryancampbell.co, and touch base with us, and we'll be able to hook you up with one.
Yeah. So where can someone go to hear you speak, and how often do you speak?
Well, speaking's my full time profession now. So I did used to speak in Australia after the round the world flight, but I am here in the US to do this full time. So I speak all over the country and around the world at different events. And if somebody wants to have us speak to them, whether that's in person or especially now, we actually run a full 3 camera virtual studio. So we are on Zoom a whole lot right now. So we
Yeah.
can come to you and your organization however you please. It's all about just delivering that content and doing some good. So if you want to inquire with us, you can email me directly, ryan@ryancampbell.co. It's not .com. I cannot afford the M just yet. It's ryan@ryancampbell.co. The website is ryancampbell.co also. So jump online, drop us a line, and we can definitely kind of pull something together, tailor something for whatever your needs and problems are at this point in time.
Nice. Yeah. How long do you think you'll go back to speaking in person?
That's a hard one. I'd like to think maybe late fall. I think probably the next few weeks are going to tell a whole lot.
Yeah.
But the industry's changed, and a lot of people are in this virtual world. And I think this has forced us to innovate and prove the virtual models. So we have a cool option available, which is it removes the travel expenses and a whole bunch of other costs, and allows us to have a three-camera shoot that goes straight to, somebody's phone or iPad or computer and straight to their home. So I think virtual will stick around more than it ever has been, but I'd like to hopefully think that by late fall, or if not early next year, that we're back in person events.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that. My last guest, we were talking about how after all this is over with the COVID-19, that everyone is doing telework and Zoom and all these kind of things, that we think it'll just stick around after.
I think it will. I think there'll be like a hybrid model. I think there's probably organizations out there that went, "Hey, this is unreal. Like, we just want content, and this is a great way to get content." However, you will never ever replace the camaraderie and physical being of, say, a conference or an in-person event. So I think they're going to come back with a vengeance for sure. I think it'll be a little bit of a easy kind of gradual work up to where it was prior to this. I think people will be a little bit scared. I know Microsoft have announced that they're not running any in-person events till halfway through next year. So who knows what is going to happen? Who's going to follow suit? But I think the virtual stuff. You're right. You're definitely right. It's going to hang around, much more prevalent than it ever was. That's for sure.
All right, Ryan, is there anything else that you want to say?
No, look, I appreciate you having me on the show, Oscar. And once again, if anyone wants to reach out, if they want to ask questions, or if they're interested in learning more about the speaking or the book, just send me an email or jump on the website and touch base with us. We would love to chat. So again, I appreciate you having me on the show.